Shwmae a chroeso I Sgwrs, podlediad Consortiwm Canolbarth y De. Yn y podlediad hwn byddwch chi'n clywed y trafodaethau diweddara am bob math o bethau addysg. Hello and welcome to Sgwrs, the Central South Consortium podcast. In this podcast we'll bring you the very latest discussions on all things education.
Hello and welcome to Sgwrs, the podcast series from Central South Consortium. My name is Joanne Nichols and I am the lead practitioner for science in the Central South Consortium. I'm also the leader of learning for science at Aberdare Community School. In this podcast episode, I'm also joined by my secondary colleagues again. And in this episode, we're going to discuss science capital and science literacy. You know, when we were discussing the list of episodes, science capital was something that, as a phrase, I thought, well, that's an interesting phrase. That's quite news to me. But of course, it is science in everyday life, isn't it? And of course, we were talking about in this episode strategies that we have used to make science, accessible, and this idea that you don't want to be told, I don't like science, when am I going to use science? And Dale, I know that you've worked hard, haven't you, in Whitmore on this?
Yeah, and one of the sort of, I mentioned previously, we've rewritten lots of our schemes of learning, and particularly at Key Stage 3, this plays an important part in it, trying to make things relevant. Got like a theme-based approach, so the topic is theme-based, trying to relate it back to sort of real-world context as much as we can. One of my sort of main bugbears as a head of department is the idea of a practical for the sake of a practical. I had so many discussions with going back and forth between technicians, and as I'm sure you're all aware of, and other people, where why are we doing that practical? What's the reason for it? And it's got to be to teach them a skill. And where could they then use that skill? And so that's something we've worked on a lot, is to try and make sure that the practicals that are involved within our schemes of learning are relevant and are joined up. And the other thing to think about with that is in terms of that lesson itself. What do you want to get out of that lesson? Well, if you're doing a practical, you want to get results, and you're teaching them about how to get results. I think in the past we've been guilty of sort of shoehorning something in and then trying to do an exam question on it, and it's all too much, and you lose the impact of the practical skills, and you lose the impact of the exam question or whatever it is you're trying to do. So it's keeping it relevant, and then making those links and saying, like, well, if you were a forensic scientist, you might use this for that, or if you were a marine biologist, you might use it for that, and then bringing it back again into more everyday. If you're baking a cake, you need to know how much stuff to put in the cake, and that sort of thing. And sometimes you can see the penny drop, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, it's chemistry.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely one of the things that, that I think that we're all guilty of, is that they'll often do a practical and not use any of the data at all that's been gathered in the practical. They won't talk about it or say what it's telling them. But I think that's absolutely one of the things that, you mentioned about schemes of learning, and particularly, not that we just do things because we have to, but with the curriculum for Wales now, which we haven't touched upon at all actually in these podcasts, it's very much, isn't it, about, science for me. How is it relevant to me? We've all got a mobile phone, we've all got a body, we've all got, it's all about making science relevant, isn't it? And I think that we worked hard when we were producing new resources, and we were producing new schemes of learning, that we, even to using, images in those booklets that were relevant to them, that they weren't, and something that they could hook into and really get involved with, and also getting their feedback on things as well. Pupil voice, is really powerful, isn't it? If you say to them, what would make science more enjoyable to you? And then often their feedback, they like these little short animations, they like these short recalls, and that can be powerful and useful as well from the point of view of science capital as well, can't it? But also it was about, I think you've mentioned this in professions, science capital as well is also about where science can take you, isn't it? And Paul, I think you've done quite a bit, haven't you? Down with you on science capital, and colleagues within your department too.
Yeah, well,
Another project that the CSC was funding this year was a science capital project, and one of the members of the department, she's just begun. So we've just started to look into it, and it's interesting that we've spent in previous podcasts, understandably, a lot of time talking about literacy, science literacy for exams, and we focus a lot on examinations, but in the documentation about science capital, one of the phrases I took and read and thought that's interesting was that it says that science capital encourages problem solving and creative thinking. It's not just about getting the answer right, which sort of goes against what we are as teachers. We're always encouraging them to get, you're going to get the answer right. This is the right answer. That was wrong. Whereas science capital is about them exploring and thinking about what, and I think Dale said, they've all got a mobile phone. They've all got PlayStations. They all use scientific applications every day, and it's about making it relevant for what their world is. They might have a parent who's a mechanic. They might have a parent who works in a care home, and how their work links to science. We do talk about aspirations and where science can take them, but our starting point is always what is it in their world that relates to science, so they can see it's not there are aspects of my daily life that I can relate to science. My parent, my grandmother, whoever they have, I didn't realize they had a job that was science related, but actually yes they do, and that's empowering for them, because and hopefully really ignites their interest in the subject.
Yeah, and I think, to go back to a previous podcast with Beth, and was talking about series circuits, and I'm looking at her lovely Christmas tree in the background. Her Christmas tree lights, one goes out, they all go out. Why is that? Beth?
I do actually talk about that, and I talk about if the whole house was wired as a series circuit, what happens when you go to the toilet in the middle of the night, which always leads to lots of giggles, and then they go, oh, you wake everybody up, and it's like, yeah, and then the sort of penny drops. I was going to link into, I've been teaching the applied in year 11, and my other half's family are all farmers, and that has been a wealth of knowledge. So we've talked about how they breed twins, and then selective breeding, and it's led in that way. And it's like, look, science is literally everywhere. We've talked about selective breeding. We've talked about, I can't even think, but they now come in and ask how the cows are doing, and it's very sort of random, but it's got them engaged, and it's got them seeing that science isn't just sort of you come in, you do a practical, and it never leaves school. It's everywhere.
I think, it's about getting rid of this fear about science, isn't it? That it's hard. It's only for clever people in white coats, guys in labs. And it's about seeing that there's much more to science than that kind of austere and perhaps difficult image that it has had perhaps in the past. Hannah, what's your experience been with this?
Well, I'm going to bring it back to the literacy, because we do quite a few comprehension tasks. At Key Stage 3, each topic has a comprehension task, and we've tried to link that in to everyday experiences. We've got lots of letter writing as well at Key Stage 3, and again, the letter writing is on linked to sort of scientific, applied science and scientific information. We've also used the that COP26 resources, and there was lots of information there, because quite a few of our pupils want to know about the oceans and about global warming, etc. So there's quite a lot on the COP26, and it was all differentiated resources. Again, it was a comprehension, it was writing letters, writing to the MP, so they are part of the community as well.
Yeah, and it's about that engagement with science, isn't it? And I think, there are some aspects of the specification that are difficult that we have to teach, isn't it? And it's about making that real world for them, and you just gave an example in a previous episode, Beth, with literacy, talking about covalent bonding, and talking about, right, well, what does co mean as a prefix is together? And it's a little gain, isn't it? It's a little win that I know we might not say, that's particularly science capital, but it is about making it real world, isn't it? And I think, there will be certain aspects of the science course that they can really get involved with and get on, but then there will be other ones then, other topics that are difficult, and it's about making that real world experience, isn't it? Dale, have you, and you've worked hard with schemes of learning for that. Can you give us any examples?
Well, I think a lot of it is stuff that we all do anyway. I think sometimes it's just making ourselves aware of that and making it more explicit perhaps, but I'm sure we all use different analogies to try and explain stuff and real world contexts. Of course, Whitmore a few years ago was Barry Comprehensive School, which was all boys. So, you could often fall back on the context of football, talking about the number of shots you might have in a game compared to the number of goals and relate that to rate of reaction. I still do that. It's not like I've stopped, but just trying to link those to those real world applications. So even though, yes, it's a scientific concept that you have to learn for your exam, it's actually something that it applies in lots of other different contexts that you will use day in, day out, sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's getting over that idea, isn't it? That I don't need science. What's science ever done for me? What do the Romans ever do for me? It's that kind of real world contextualizing that I think is something that to get pupils involved in it, is something that it is, we definitely need to do, doesn't it? Paul, I mean, you've talked about that a lot, especially from the point of view engagement with some of the more perhaps difficult classes. You've got any experience to share there where we've used real world science to engage pupils?
I think the important thing is to get them to realise that they already have a lot of science capital. It's not something that is completely new to them. They already have experiences, whether it's playing football, whether it's any sports team. You can always link anything that they do, whether it's going shopping, bringing the food home, and why do you put it in the fridge? Why do you put it in the freezer? There's all simple things. Why do you clean your teeth? Simple things. They understand. They don't necessarily translate that as being scientific, but if you can show them that this is science, anything that it can be as a scientific context, they realize that, I know some science already. And it's not a question of I'm learning all of this. This is all brand new. And as you say, when am I going to use this again? It's stuff that will help them just to understand the world around them.
And I think it's interesting, one of the things that Dale said earlier on, when you said you were looking at why are we doing practicals? Are we doing them for the sake of them? Because I think often practicals are a way of increasing engagement, aren't they? I mean, they love practical. Is it what we're doing today? Are we doing prac when they come in? But it's about, I think, what you said, Dale, that practical is relevant. And why are we doing it? And can it be? I mean, I'm not talking necessarily about, the specified practicals at GCSE, but other practicals that we often put in for engagement purposes.
Yeah, and that's a big thing we've been looking at, and then spending the right amount of time on those, like I mentioned earlier. I thought of an example that we've started off this year, and it does link to Curriculum for Wales, is that we have a topic in Year 7 where we teach about circuits, so series and parallel circuits, and we've got one of our Year 7 lessons is taught by a tech teacher who specialises in electronics. So they're actually making a circuit with him, and while we are teaching the science behind it and the symbols and the current and all of that sort of stuff. So they're learning those skills and they're linking them. Because I think you often find there are students who might be quite disengaged, and it doesn't happen all the time, but might be quite disengaged in science potentially, but love tech and love DT and love getting their hands on and making stuff. So trying to make those links and make it relevant in that way, so that even if it's not an at-home use, they can see that it is a transferable skill within school, and that's something that we're looking to develop more as we move forward.
Yeah, and I think as we work, similarly to you, these AOLEs will perhaps foster that theme, like you said, that thematic approach, and that, I don't like sitting down doing the theory behind it, but I really like doing the prac. I really like doing the building of the circuit. And I think, again, like we said, we haven't said much about curriculum for Wales, but that's certainly a driver, isn't it, potentially, for science capital and where science qualifications can take you. Okay, well, that brings this discussion to the end. I think science capital and science literacy is certainly something that we would be looking to develop as we move on with new courses coming soon at level 2 and the curriculum for Wales development as well. Thank you very much. Look forward to discussing some more with you in our next episode.
Diolch am wrando ar y benod hon o Sgwrs. Cofiwch ein dilyn ar Twitter a Facebook, tanysgrifio ein sianel YouTube, ymuno yn cymunedau ar ein gwefan a darllen ein bwletin ysgolion wythnosol am y newyddion diweddaraf. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sgwrs. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, join our online communities via our website, and read our weekly school bulletin for the latest news. Hwyl am y tro. Bye for now.